Marketplace. And so I agree. I think the explosion of digital art will be a thing. And you got something.
Can you hear me now?
Corporations are in this space. Like they are paying attention and they are making heavy investments.
Test.
We brought up
Shaka. Can you hear me?
Their governance board. Look at the companies on there. DLJ Piper.
Okay, cool.
Largest law firms.
So you can just talk, then I'll be able to say whatever you need. I want to do it this way just so people could join, but if you want to try WhatsApp, you can do that.
In this space, it's going to be those same multinationals who become the players.
And I'll tell you something interesting, right? So getting back to the idea of where adoption it was very interesting that about a year or two into that strategy, Kadera realized, but we also need gaming. We also need
that. Crew over there. Backstage.
They realized that you can't go just to the behemoths and say, okay, you know, bring traction to my chains, and that's how we're going to get. Like, we need to have both simultaneously. And I think trying to be a public permissionless chain, but presenting as an enterprise chain, it was something that people thought was going to work, and I think everyone kind of grew outside of that. So I love the fact that now they've got an ecosystem fund and they've got a foundation, and they're kind of thinking in that like Ethereum-like way.
No, 100%. I actually really like the team there. So
the audio from the stage, is it coming okay?
Really appreciate you being here. Where can people find you? Where can they follow your thought leadership?
Perfect.
I don't mind now.
I don't think this is thought leadership. Just ramble. You can find me on Twitter. I think my Twitter handle's ZK.
Let's see if I can prop it up somewhere.
I'm also a big Digital Horse fan, although they're not treating you so well these days. I think CK Simmerman is my Twitter handle, so SIMERMAN. You can also find me on Telegram. I'm gonna dox myself on Telegram. That's where I go if you want to come say hi. It's DICCZLE, so it's 3 Z's. And yeah, love to chat. Like I sit between
Are you live right now?
This industry and always looking to connect with people and better understand how it's growing, how it's evolving. And
yeah, I gotta go test it on another.
Thank you for this very impromptu. Everyone, give it up for Dan Zimmerman. Thank you again. And he touched on inclusion. He touched on growing the network and the people in this space.
Try to prop up my phone.
Is going to cover that as well. So specifically, the title is How NFTs Are the Gateway for Inclusion, Diversity, and Future Proofing. So everyone, come on up.
I know, I'm trying to get it. Let's go. All right, I'm just gonna sit up there. Ugh.
Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to 2023. This is the How NFTs Are the Gateway to Inclusion, Diversity, and Future-Proofing conversation. I'd love to introduce our panelists today. So briefly, we've got Cass Vegas. She's the head of community at Feature.io. We have Natalie Krugvest, is cultural producer and advisor, as well as founder of Web3 Uncut. My name is Pilar Cote, and I am a curator and the founder and host of NFT Matters. Thank you again so much for being in today. So I'd love to get into it, ladies, if that's okay. So when we think of, studies that are done on all kinds of issues and that sort of thing, in the workplace, studies show diverse teams are 87% better at decision-making over non-diverse teams, right? Diverse teams offer broader perspectives. They bring more info to the table. And these types of teams outperform individuals when making decisions, and that improves as diversity increases. What exactly do we mean when we're talking about diversity and representation, and is it needed in the NFT space?
Sure, I'll go first. The quick answer is yes, it's absolutely needed.
Of course.
But I think sometimes we think of diversity very linearly. Do we have BIPOC on there? We have women on there, but there's also a diversity of roles. Sometimes at these conferences, you see the same faces over and over. You see the same founders, but you don't see maybe the head of the community, maybe you don't see the lawyer on the team, maybe you don't see the developer that does the smart contract, the auditor that does the auditing of that smart contract. So I think we need to think more robustly when we talk about diversity so that we can also expand the knowledge to the audience and not just hear, I'm the founder, this is what happened, this is how I was successful, but not know all the steps A through Z to actually be successful. So it's a deeper word than just color and gender.
Right. Did you want to add to that?
Absolutely not. We also don't think about geographical location. Sometimes at these conferences, all you see is a bunch of people from the USA or Canada. But they're some of the biggest strongholds in terms of crypto, Web3, NFTs, and even DAOs. We see the Philippines, we see Nigeria, we see all these other places where crypto is exploding. However, that is not captured at many of these events. And so we have to think about geographical location. There's also disabled folks, there's also non-binary folks and queer folks, and a long list of people who are under-resourced and underrepresented, in these spaces. And so it's important to capture all of them.
So true, so true. So with that, we've seen creatives who identify as women and people of color enter the space and learn to create NFT works in exchange for crypto, right? So they're coming in, creating works to build up a crypto holding, right? So when we see that, they also are leveraging, this orbit of tools that's at their disposal, right? AR, VR, AI, to support those works and also broaden their creative practice. How can the space encourage more access and participation by underrepresented groups? And what are those barriers to access?
That's the first part is super important, which is what are the barriers to access?
Exactly.
If you don't identify that, how can you answer the rest of the question? So sometimes there's access due to financial. I've had colleagues say, hey, I would like to mint with Ethereum, but I can only afford Tezos. And so that's already a barrier to an entire blockchain and where majority of the ecosystem is. Another step is beyond financial is access to the knowledge. What is the difference when I talk about Avalanche versus Tezos versus Ethereum versus Bitcoin? Knowing the difference. And so access comes in all types of forms. And again, we have to tackle these problems robustly and not just linearly, because you're going to cut out a large percentage of people trying to enter the space. So a big challenge in the space is not only onboarding someone into it, but then the retention. Maybe they have a bad experience, they don't come back. And now you're working twice as hard to onboard new names, as well as try and reconvince the people that were scarred the first time over. So it's again, a very heavy subject. And if you don't have the self-awareness, especially as someone who's talking about education, you're cutting out a lot of people coming into the space. And we actually need a lot more professionalism. We need more diversity. We need more young voices so that we're not having this repetition of ideas that becomes a bit stale in an ironically technical savvy space.
And also the lack of knowledge around the access to technology. The digital divide is still a thing. We have folks that are in Nigeria, they're on their mobiles, and that's how they access technology. However, many of these platforms still to this day only allow you to mint using their platforms on your desktop or your computer. And so we really need to talk about how we close the digital divide, how we make technology more accessible in these different countries, but also how we get down in the trenches. And I've told people this for years. I'm gonna tell you, I love to sleep in my house and be in my bed on the computer, talking to y'all on Twitter and all of that. But we need to get into the trenches. We need to be in Nigeria. We need to open the resource to people who are actually already there doing the work to build bridges, to bring folks in, to onboard people responsibly and sustainably. We need to be in the Philippines. We need to be in these other places and actively resource the people who are already there, not parachuted. And so we need to talk about how people are accessing technology in many different ways. That most of us here in the States, we're very privileged, by the way, and have fast internet, have access to various cryptos and exchanges. I'm not going to shade anybody right now. I'll say that for Twitter. But we need to really talk about those things and how we actively make sure that we onboard people in a way that's true to the pillars and the ethos of the space. And I've seen in the last year alone that completely crumble, and we need to get back to basic. We need to get back to the real education. We need to get back to overly resourcing the people who know what they're talking about and make sure that we center those folks. And many of those folks, and out in here, are women. Many of those folks are non-binary folks. Many of those are disabled folks. Many of these people are the people who are not from the Western world. They're not from these overly resourced communities, and they've been in the trenches doing the work. So we need to make sure we hold space for that.
Yeah, also bouncing off of that, the stigma of Africa and that continent and countries there being behind. Actually, in 2014, Apple Pay was introduced, but in 2007, that tech was already used widely in Africa. So we have to break down these stigmas of who are we really saving, who really is tech advanced. And again, just thinking, removing those walls to actually move forward in tech, you know.
I want to add a little bit to that because you mentioned something really good. Like when we think of the US, we often assume that everybody in the US has equal access, right? That everybody's got infrastructure, everybody's got full flowing internet, right? And then you look at a city like Detroit that is, predominantly Black. It is the most segregated city in the United States in terms of metro cities. It has a 70%, 70% of school kids there do not have access to the internet. Not because they can't buy it, not that because they can't pay for it, because it doesn't exist. There's nowhere to like hook it up. So, those are issues, real issues. That's the digital divide, right? And there are many communities, rural communities, across the US that no access. So, when we start solving for that, I think we're supposed to see a lot more of, access and actually. I want to move on to the next one. So equity. Equity means recognizing that we do not all start from the same place and must acknowledge and make adjustments to imbalances. Now, thinking along those lines, how can we center equity and affect the ability of people of color and women to scale like people being given $50 million? How are we funding people of color in tangible ways that redistribute wealth, right? And does this include grants, accelerators, fellowships, what have you?
That was a funny question. I've always said that it's important to, when you overly resource Black and brown folks, women, disabled folks, they've always made use of that in the space. Always, I would say 100 times fold, giving that back to folks in the community. I remember we were onboarding tons of people on Clubhouse. I get so much trips on people in the early days. I can't even, and that's the same for Daz and Blood Dave and many of our other friends who were on the ground on Clubhouse and then Twitter Spaces, making sure we're onboarding people. Didn't have Ethereum. We made sure we got you a faucet, or we did that. So, but right now, what's happening is we have a bunch of companies, a bunch of founders. I'm gonna keep it funky with y'all. Don't look like us, and they're getting overly funded. They're the ones in these rooms getting overly funded. How do we make sure that we set ourselves up and we're not just at the table? We are the table. It's not just about being in the room. It's not just about having Mexicans in the room. It's not about having Black women in the room. It's also making sure that we have access to these cap tables. We have access to these foundations that have, some of them have billions of dollars, and most of that money is not going to Black and brown folks. You have tons of accelerators. We have tons of fellowships. And many of those fellowships are people that don't look like us. They're not even sometimes white women in that space. And so let's be hyper honest about where funding is going in the space. It's not often Black and brown folks, and it's certain women. And so we need to make sure that we hold these foundations accountable. We need to make sure that we hold these accelerators accountable and make sure that folks are at the table. But we also need to create our own opportunities. Pilar, Taz, and a lot of the folks that I see in the audience, because we weren't often at the table, we had to make our own. We created our own DAO, we created our own spaces. We raised funds for people to come to conferences like this. Oftentimes we had to sacrifice our own existence at these spaces. We made sure that we carved ways for people to participate. And so we need to have these conversations with these foundations. Ethereum Foundation has, excuse my language, a lot of money. And so we need to have these conversations with these events and make sure that we're the ones on the center stage. We're the ones out here doing the work. We're the ones out here in the trenches and onboarding people. We are literally onboarding tens of thousands of people at one time. And so I think it's hyper important to tap into these resources, but we also need to make sure that these folks and these foundations also pour into our own funds so that we are controlling where money is going, what we're actually funding, and actually build an investment thesis that's aligned with the values of this space. right? And if we don't do a course correction now in Web3, I don't know where we're going. And it's actually pretty depressing, but I hope that we all can challenge each other to put our foot on these doors and bust these open to make sure that we're actually finding folks equitably.
Amen.
I think also honestly understanding that you're not prone to the problems in Web 2. I think people come into this Web 3 space wide-eyed with a lot of hope, and there is a lot of opportunity, but it doesn't mean you know how to become a founder right away. It doesn't mean you know how to run a business right away. It doesn't mean if you're an influencer in Web 2, that's going to translate into your Web 3 brand and everyone's going to support you and love you automatically, right? So we have to drop some of these thoughts coming in of what that privilege looks like and learn to also buckle down and create that new audience. The audience are actually vastly different, but the problems are actually vastly similar, right? So knowing that there's the same problems in Web 2, lacking diversity, the access to the resources, the knowledge, you don't have that in Web 3 just because we're excited about decentralization. And that sometimes needs to be verbally said, because the assumptions come in and you get let down and then you again exit and we have that problem of retention and we lose a lot of talent, we lose a lot of voices, therefore we lose a lot of perspective. And so we have to meet Web3 at an honest point. We have to take the chips off of our shoulders. If you're popular in Web 2, be at an honest point. You have to come in with humility, because with humility, you also learn more, right? If you come with arrogance, you miss a lot of information. This is not the space to be arrogant. It will change tomorrow. It will change next week, and you'll be stuck in your arrogance. And so just knowing that, but also when those people come in, having grace, right? If we also meet those people with chips on their shoulders, with chips on our shoulders, because we understand Web 3 and you don't know yet, then how, what are we fostering? What is our actual ethos that we say we have when we put a wall up against Web 2? So I think there's a way to coexist, and it starts with humility.
That's a really good point. I wanted to add too to that, people are gonna people, right? So if there were biases in Web 2, right, those biases are coming over, right? So the interesting thing that I think is really special about this space is that you do see it more, maybe because the space is so small, right? You do see that people are less likely to have it as an afterthought. And people are trying to be more mindful about it, right? And be proactive about it. Be like, I want to do things differently here. I want to pay attention. I want to try to build. And people make mistakes, obviously, but there seems to be like these open conversations. So I'm going to move on to, we've seen the highlighting of people of color and women as performative, right? Where it was not actualized and it was just for show. We've seen that in exhibits. We've seen that in projects, where it's like, oh, it's all about this. Or we're centering so-and-so and we're centering these groups. And then it was just like a big letdown. What are things brands and organizations need to steer away from in order to build well and have the support of the NFT community for the long term? This is a tough one because there's lots of layers here, but
it is layered, right? Like, what's the differentiation between performative and good intention? I've had people say, oh, well, we're going to do a women's panel. What women's panel on what? What is the topic? Women developers, women lawyers with IP, licensing, women creators, what is the topic? I feel like we stop short with after that word woman because we think that's a topic in itself, which it's not, right? So we have a lot more to offer. So maybe labels and the appropriate way to actually utilize them. A simple example is we'll say, oh, this is so-and-so, she's a female artist. When is that appropriate? Not in front of the actual skill set that they have. This is an artist. This is a producer. We don't say this is a male artist. I bet you guys never seen that before. That's a male. Brace yourself. So having those awarenesses, right? So that shows me the research in itself to not utilize it in that sense shows me you're not being performative. And sometimes it comes across and it is, and you correct yourself. That shows me you have humility, right? But to do that on a public stage also shows the ignorance of the people on the stage. And unfortunately, welcome Lo. Lo's Elysium points on our houses.
Lizzie, artist, serial entrepreneur, founder of Yows.
But it shows the ignorance of the people speaking, right? And then if you see that and you're not inspired by the people speaking, when would you actually want to be someone speaking, right? They can't get the labels right. So it's really important. You have to think outside of yourself. You have to think of who you're representing, what company you're representing. That might put a distaste and say, I don't know if I want to work with that company. And there's not that many companies right now to work with in Web3. Right. So having that step back, learning the terminology, this is like basic respect as well, will also help the future proofing and the growth of your industry, your company in this industry.
Welcome.
Hello.
So I want to get into, according to Pew Research, right? Many of members of Gen 2 are more ethnically diverse than any previous generation. They're on track to be the most well-educated generation yet, and they're digital natives, right? A lot of these kids grew up on all kinds of tech, right? Left, right, center. Since they were 3, they were touching everything. So 2/3 are aware and vocal about inequalities based on skin color, culture, what have you. And this group is like age 11 to 27 for anyone who's not really aware. So now, since people identify with what your brand is and what it could be, right? How important are brand values in this space as it develops and grows, as the space develops and grows?
Movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
I honestly believe that the culture at a brand is almost as important, if not more important, than the customer service, because customer service can be blamed on that employee, but the culture is pervasive, and it's something that these kids will want to stay away from and not be associated with, right? And I think when you talk about brand loyalty, you're talking about people who associate themselves with a brand, right? You go somebody who has Coca-Cola memorabilia all over their house. It's not because Coke tastes great, it's because Coke makes them feel great, or they remember Coke in amazing moments. You know what I'm saying? They remember going someplace that they used to get an ice cold Coke. So now they're infatuated with Coke. But these kids are a little different. They kind of want to be infatuated with morals, right? With good practices, with sustainability, with keeping things moving forward in a positive way, regardless of if your product is actually trash or not. Which I think is another thing. That's a whole other conversation we can have later, right? Because a lot of business models that they're giving this loyalty to, like the subscription model, it's very. It's they take that loyalty and then they exploit it. But that's another conversation. That's another question. So,
Do you want to add to it now?
First of all, I would say I had this conversation last week with one of the friends who works at a gaming company in Web3. And she was going on about consumers and consumer behavior. And what I always tell people is we're not just consumers here. We're not just here to buy things. We're not just here to give our loyalty up to you. People are active participants. Like everybody in this audience is probably an active participant in Web3, actively building relationships, actually building connections, and the behavior is much different. The roles that we play in the space as people who are participating here is so much different than in the rest of the world. And so I tell people all the time, like, if you want that loyalty in like Web3, you got to show up, but you also have to show up for more than cis white news. They hit up on some random list. You have to show up more than the popular whatever that has 100,000 bots and running these humongous like botted Twitter spaces. Like you actively have to show up for folks if you want that actual loyalty. You actually have to have some type of values. Do you show up? Do you support folks? Are you actively bringing in artists who live here and not just some random people that nobody knows? Are you actively like supporting women? Are you actively supporting Black folks? I'm not buying anything if I don't see any folks that I know on your stages, if I don't see any folks that you're actually championing, that you're not backing, that you're not supporting, that you're not putting your millions of dollars in grant money behind these folks, I'm not supporting you. And you're the people that actively like hang out with me or follow me or participate in my communities. And so it requires you to actually hone in on what are my actual values? How do I want to exist here as a company? What does that actually mean? And it means something much different than it does in the rest of the world. And so like first and foremost, like let's stop calling people consumers and let's call them what we really are. We're participants in a greater ecosystem that requires you to be much more than just a quote unquote brand.
Absolutely, absolutely. Cass, want to know what your take is on that too. So,
Yeah, I agree with Natalie, though it is participatory. But I always describe the NFT space as someone coming in new as it's very savage. And what I mean about that is that that transparency will make or break you. We've actually had very young um developers in the space that would actually take a bunch of money from like a brand that would try to scam. And the joke would be on all the adults. These kids are so much smarter, so much quicker, so much more self-aware, and it's kind of a hard pill for us as adults to swallow. And I think identifying that, meeting it with humility, and knowing that in tech, that could be totally flipped the other way around, is a very dangerous or beautiful place to play in. So you have to come to the table with something to offer and not something to take, because it could actually be taken from you rather quickly. We've seen it over and over. But that's also part of the demise of the space. Because that can happen, it pushes people away. It's hard to educate. It's difficult to onboard. It's hard to bring in a brand unless they really understand that it's not just another model of revenue. And I've heard that before in panels. Hey, we're this company, but we're gonna dip our toe into Web3, but just because it might be another way to revenue what we already have going on. Instead of saying, hey, how can we actually really uplift the innovation of our whole company in a creative way, in a way that we haven't done before? How can we bring our existing brand loyalty into tech and not Web3 and try to pull them into old models and use us as another form of revenue? How about we bring everyone else in and we work together at a foundational level? Not at a superficial level, not at a level of vanity metrics where we get the person with the highest amount of followers, but the least amount of engagement and knowledge. And we actually have a conversation around it. So it's a savage space in the best ways. If you're a good actor, and if you're a bad actor, we'll see it. We'll see it eventually. And you don't get a second chance. You don't get a second chance in Web3. It's much harder.
I want to add to that. One of the things that we do see, and you touched on it, are brands that come in and think that, oh, well, I have 2 billion followers. We're just going to do some Web3 project. We're just going to do an NFT launch, and bam, it's just going to go. Just everyone's going to get it, right? But they forgot to onboard their 2 billion people. They have no wallets. They don't know what it is. They don't even know what an NFT is. They don't know what it means. They don't know how they can utilize it. They don't know how they can leverage it. They don't know what value it brings. And right, none of that. And so you have these people standing there going, but we have like 2 billion followers and we have this awesome rapper. So yeah. Can I just do the last one? Amazing. So with this space having the potential to transform the way we interact with people in the real world and in the digital world, do you believe that this is a unique and opportune moment to use big picture thinking and actively build for representation towards a future that is diverse and inclusive?
Oh, can I do it?
Yeah, nice.
So I think that it's an opportunity for people to say, okay, instead of having a seat at the table, let's go build a table, right? Let's go build a table. Let's go build some chairs, some benches. Let's build a communal space instead of fighting for the crumbs that fall from that table and begging for a space, right? Now, at the beginning, the beginning of a space is when you start to come and build railroads, right? You don't worry about the train, right? You bring the pickaxes, the shovels, and you start laying the groundwork, and then you own the ground.
That's it. That's it.
For a seat at the table, I think big picture, we should be focused on creating our own table, right? Our own bounty. That's what I think, big picture.
All right. That's it.
This is NFT NYC 2020.
All right.
It is NFT NYC 2023. Guys, great job. I love the fact that you called out followers not equating to expertise. Yeah, that is not indicative of a successful project in any way, shape, or form. Great job. So next up, we're going to talk about
Awesome.
NFTs.
Thanks so much, Jocko. That was awesome, man. Hey, what up? What up? That's Creatress in the house. Got some other Web3 natives here hanging out. What up, Charles? How you doing, man?
What's up?
See you, bro. We were just streaming that to the DAO, you know?
Okay, cool.
Good chat. It's a good chat. Yeah, man. That's what's up. That's what's up, man.
What's up?
How we doing? How we doing? Well, I gotta eat something, so I'll stay live for a little bit. I'll show some more.
Followers does
And
not.
then I gotta eat though.
I'll just introduce myself.
But how did it go though? It all went through good? You think it good?
Technology. I've done a lot of research on Web3 specifically and what it takes for Web3
Pardon?
into a mainstream technological disruption, how to get Web3 and tokens for the billion users.
Yeah, let me just I'll walk around a little bit just to show a bit and then I'll roll just a little bit. Yeah, so this is the NFT NYC 23, all kinds of cool tech, all kinds of cool Web3 projects showing what they're working on. And this is the real tech, you know, these aren't people just shilling their PFP project, you know, this is like, I've seen this guy who's putting together basically kind of like a new ENS, but it actually works as a website as well. So I thought that was kind of cool. Full NFT life cycle security. Yeah, what's up? What's up, Jocko? Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Okay. That's okay. It's probably just their Wi-Fi is weak. A little bit of a delay is okay. I mean,
Centralization doesn't just mean that it's not.
well, I won't be able to keep